a little cheap, because Hunter wasn't anywhere near as good as Rogue or Mage, obviously. But Hunter was really fun in HFC.
Come, show me your strength.
Yeah. Archimond was definitely the first, like, you aren't using weak auras? Question mark fight. What is this doing? Hello? Gorfiend was a really good fight. Gorfiend was the best fight in there. In terms of, like, it being enjoyable for, like, it's like, difficulty, you know? It's, I was reading, like, a Reddit thread recently that was, like, people were saying they hated WoD because of Gorfiend, and I was like, really? Because I feel like in most raids, there's, like, that one standout fight that's, like, not the end boss, like the Thogar, the Sludge Fist, the Siege Crafter, you know, that kind of thing. And Gorfiend was that fight in there, at least to me. It was like, it was just really fun, like it felt the right difficulty.
Show me your strength.
I can see the argument that it was too hard of a fight for as early as in the instances it was. But I think that's kind of like a stupid take, personally. Like, it's like, that's like a loot monster take, right? That's like, I'm not getting enough gear. It's like, I enjoy the fights just for the sake of, like, doing the fights, you know? So, to say Gorfiend, to like, hate on Gorfiend, like, what it tells me is, like, you don't enjoy doing bosses too much. Because it was only, like, a, you know, like 100, maybe, like, 150-ish pull boss. 150 is, like, way top end. I think it was, like, 120 for us. And we were week 1, right? Like, and that's not that much. I mean, it's, I wish there were more 100 pull bosses. This is what I'm saying. I would rather have, like, a raid of, like, 500 or 600 pull bosses than a raid of, you know, 10 bosses. 8 of them are sub 10 pulls, one of them's 200, one of them's 300. Fuck that, you know? Like, I don't know. It was interesting to me, seeing, like, a different perspective, and, like, I'm not saying that perspective's wrong, but it was a thread I was reading about, like, what was the worst expansion, and, like, there were a ton of people that said WoD, and there were a ton of people that cited Gorfiend specifically. And it was just interesting, hadn't heard of it. Tyrant? So, Tyrant is a fight that, like, if somebody will ask me the difference between, like, Final Fantasy fights and WoW fights, I would cite Tyrant as being, like, a very WoW fight, you know? Like, do you guys remember doing Tyrant and how fucking boring that fight was? Like, you would go, like, 30 pulls before you had to do anything on that boss. You know? You literally just did your rotation. And, like, the healers either kept you alive or they didn't. It was so, like, terribly, terribly boring. I mean, Shadow is good because Shadow is good on, like, all the progression bosses in Hellfire. Shadow kind of fell apart on farm when people were Giga geared and people had rings because Shadow's burst profile was really bad. But Shadow just had tons of self-healing, enough mobility for that fight. It was solid, good single target. It was just like, that fight I just remember like zoning out pole to pole, like, oh my god, this is just... There's so many WoW fights where it feels like if you don't get picked as like the one person in the raid to do the mechanic, like it's just a target dummy. And I hate that. And that's why I like Final Fantasy a little better, because you never get away with like hiding in the raid in this game. Like every single pull of the boss, you have a job, you know? And that's my big thing. Like, it's just so many times you're doing fights in WoW where like you'll go like an entire prog cycle without even like getting picked to be the guy with the mechanic. Did we play Clarity of Power on Tyrant? I don't remember. I don't think we played Clarity on any boss in HFC, did we? Like, AS was so good then, and that's why they introduced the class trinket that made, like, COP good. I don't remember playing COP. Maybe I did, but I don't remember playing COP on, like, anything in there. Other than maybe on Fell Lord? I don't know. This is so long ago. Then again, like, well, Tyrant, you had like a second ad for a lot of the time. So I think it would make sense that you'd play AS there, just for cleave. The best prog boss overall in WoW? What do you mean, like most fun to prog on? Or just like my favorite boss? Yeah, I think the answer is probably... If you did the boss, I think the answer's like fairly obvious. Siegecrafter, baby! That boss was so fucking good. It's crazy that, like, I don't think any boss, like, even came close to it in the entire boss time I played WoW. That wasn't an end boss. End bosses are a different category, and I don't necessarily mean, like, a better category. There's a different expectation on end boss, and, like, the phasing structure of it that makes it, like, stupid to put into the same category as, like, non-end bosses, but... Siegecrafter, giga fun. Just, I don't know, there's always like, well, most of the time there's like one really fun boss per tier that isn't the end boss. That's the thing, from as far back as like I care to go, in like Wrath, ICC. Wait, is there a fun boss in ICC? I don't think there is one. Dude, people love ICC, and I don't blame them, because like, it had some deep cut, not deep cut, that had some like badass like lore. It was fun to just be in ICC, right? But if I'm taking like an unbiased stance on that raid, I think that entire raid like kind of stank. Like the fights that weren't just single target doofuses were just annoying. Yeah, I agree. ICC is carried by the context, for sure. Like Death Whisperer, I think is like the closest to like being kind of fun. It's hard for me to judge Alwedaei now. It's so old at this point that it's like difficult for me to like rate it within its own context and not as like, man, like, because some of those fights, like by modern standards, like every one of those fights that isn't like Emeron kind of stank, you know? It's, at the time, it was crazy, but it's hard for me to like remember the at the time mindset, you know? Like Hodir, like all of the keepers were such garbage fights. There's like one mechanic and it's just like, I don't know, like Hodir was bad, Freya was bad, Thorum was bad, Mimiron was good. Mimiron was good, Vezax was good, Yogg was good. It was fun that there were like a bunch of like steamroll bosses at the front of the instance that just kind of like shout out loot. You know, there were just a lot of bosses, and it was kind of like a cool time to adventure through this huge place, you know? But by modern standards, it's from a different era, you know? Dude, I saw that they are like banning GDKPs. I thought that was such a fucking base decision. The ICC poo-poo. It was fun to do damage in there because like it was literally just like the EPing stroke simulator. Like, oh man, did you see how much damage I did on Rotface? Like, it's like, actually, Rotface was a fun fight. That Rotface was probably my favorite fight in there. And then Cataclysm comes out. Cataclysm is like where we enter like the next era of WoW, in my opinion. You know, like the fight design was like so much improved in Cata. Yeah, it's kind of a shame because people just don't have nostalgia for Cata and MoP the same way they do for the first 3 expansions. And that's fine. They're not wrong to feel that way, right? Like, nostalgia's a powerful force, and like, there's a reason you feel it. But, I will say that, like, the raids in Cataclysm and MoP are just objectively superior to the first 3 expansions raids. But that doesn't matter if, like, you don't have memories in there, if you don't enjoy, but like that's not why most people play the game. You know, oh, I want these really cool fun fights. No, they just want to get gear and beat up some bosses, right? That's what most people playing WoW care about. Just like power fantasy. I think there's very few of us that are like in it for the thrill of conquering this video game puzzle, you know? I do wonder if like Mopsy's somewhat of a resurgence compared to Cata, because I think people kind of unfairly hate Cata, and there are also people who fairly hate Cata because Cata was like a really low content X-Pack in terms of endgame content. It obviously like had a huge amount of content on redoing the world, which is something that had to happen. They had to do that, but whatever expansion that happened in was going to be a shit expansion because of resource constraint. Yeah, it's... I don't know, I understand that, like, there wasn't enough buy-in for post-Wrath expansion. But I do wonder if, like, it bounces back with MoP a little bit, because I think it's, like, almost undeniable that class gameplay peaked in MoP. And, like, the only other time it was, like, anywhere near close to that was in Legion. Like, I think there will be a little bit of a spike in MoP because the raids were just banger after banger, and the classes were really fun to play. I think no one will play WoD because class design was really not very good in WoD. Like, I think Hunter is the only class I'd say that, like, was at, like, its own high point in the scheme of the game. I think everybody else was, like, probably close to the worst they'd ever been. Except for Sub-Rogue and Arcane Mage at the very end of the expansion once they got their trinkets, right? Like, that was the only time it was, like, fun to play those classes. The rest was, like, actual, like, bottom-tier class gameplay. I think that's a fine opinion of that. I don't think I agree. I played in Dragonflight, and it's just... It's at that point we're entering, like, subjective territory, and I will agree that it's, like, fine to think that gameplay in post-Dragonflight is, like, the best it's ever been. But having played in Dragonflight, I don't agree, but I think it's fine to think that. It's just a different style of gameplay. Like, I will never have more fun than when snapshotting existed. You know, it's impossible. And for me, personally, I think the proc, like, spam kind of gameplay is a bit overplayed to me. It feels like every class is, like, really, really deep into I press the button when it lights up territory. Very few exceptions. And most of the ones that are exceptions are, like, kind of annoying to play for separate reasons. They don't, like, fit into fight design very well. But, no, I think Dragonflight at the very least, and, like, well, post-Dragonflight at the very least is, like, undeniably at least a local maximum in gameplay enjoyability, if not a global maximum, but it's certainly, like, improved over previous expansions. Yeah, that shit's so fucking annoying. Dots are just a tool to make your mastery work. Blech. But, if they make it to... So, anyway, the point I was trying to make was, like, I think they either skip WoD Classic, or that's when they stop doing Classic, because I don't think anybody will play WoD. Like, I'm a huge fan of the raids in WoD, and even if you said, hey, we've got 19 people, we just need you, just log in, play whatever you want. If you told me that, I would still go, I don't know if I want to play in WoD. You know, there's no class that I have, like, a super strong nostalgia for in WoD. And that's a problem. That's, like, the biggest problem. Like, you have to have, like, that, oh fuck, I didn't play Unholy DK and Wrath, but I always wish I did. I'm gonna play Unholy. Like, there has to be something that, like, draws you in on the class level, I think, to make you want to play. That's why, like, Classic exists. Like, it's like, man, I wish I could relive my life as a Fury Warrior. I wish I could relive my life as a Shadow Priest. In WoD, there isn't a single class I'd want to, like, I go, like, oh man, I really missed out. I wish I played that. I wouldn't even want to play Shadow Priest again. Like, it wasn't a good time for anybody. I think Marksman Hunter is the only class that was, like, pretty okay to play, but it wasn't, like, that fun. And I think without that, like, oh fuck, I would love to play that kind of, like, attitude, that you can't make, like, a Classic expansion work. You know, I had fun playing Shadow, but I was in a guild where, like, I was allowed to play Shadow. There were a lot of, like, times where Shadow was, like, kind of a troll pick. It was never, like, so bad that, like, you know, it was like, oh my god, you get this guy out of the fucking raid. But it was definitely like, we're bringing you to get you loot for like a later fight where we think you're going to be good, not for your value on this fight. And that kind of like is a bad place to be in, especially like 10 years later, you know, because the tolerance for like bad specs when you're in a classic setting is like a lot lower, right? Everybody's going to be better playing the game now. They're just, the skill floor has gone up so much since when it was like actual content. All of the guides, all of like the knowledge of the game is like complete 2020 hindsight, and everybody's just going to be doing way more damage. So like the deltas between like good specs and bad specs is going to go way up. It's going to like increase way more than it did at the time. Like you could be like a goated player playing like a pretty mediocre spec and like beat people playing what we know now is like the best spec in the game, just because you were like better at finding like advantages and, you know, sometimes just better at padding than they were. But you will never have that advantage returning to a classic setting. And so that's like another problem. I think if, you know, my memory of Shadow was like, and I always did pretty good on the DPS, but now if I went back, it would like, it would probably be hunters as far as the eye could see, and you would just like everything that you put AS on to dot would just like instantly die, and it's like, then what, you play COP on every fight? Fuck that. Yeah, Shadow and Emerald Nightmare is crazy. The sad part about Emerald Nightmare is that you guys probably maybe remember, I played so much fucking time on the Legion beta, like mastering Surrender to Madness, and then because of my work schedule, I missed like half of the bosses in Emerald Nightmare. I did the first boss during my lunch break on like my first or second like week of work. I like went home, killed the boss, they like swapped me in for somebody, they killed the boss, and then I like went back to work. Then they killed Ursoc, then they killed the bird, then they killed the dragons, and what really it's unfair of me to think this, but I was really upset at the time because I was coming home from work and I was like, finally I can like get back to raiding. And I like got in and they weren't very far on the dragons. And so I was like, okay, I'm ready to go whenever. And like they just never put me in. And I'm not saying it was like wrong of them to do that, but like that was very obviously like a really strong Shadow Priest fight, the council dragons. And they were only like a couple pulls, like they were like moderately progressed, like not definitely like in the first half of like the total pulls on the fight, and it really rubbed me the wrong way that like it just fucked with my mental, that like, you know, I was really not enjoying that my corporate work life had started, and like finally, you know, I get home, I'm back to the thing I want to be doing in my life, you know, playing this game, and they're just like, oh, we don't need you. And again, I want to make it very clear that it is fine that they like said that, like, you're like changing the roster out, it's certainly rude to the person you're replacing. Like obviously there's some type of gain that they could probably make, like how many, you know, integer pulls would me being in on the best spec in the game remove from the total pull count? I don't know. Certainly some number, you know, just by having like way more damage. And somebody who probably is going to perform better than whoever the worst DPS in there is, but at a certain point it's like, does it matter? Is it worth making that change? And you know, we thought that was a pretty easy raid once we were in there, so it's like, you know, if we don't really think the gear is going to make too big of a difference, like why make the swap, why hurt somebody's feeling, but it fucked with my mental to like to be like left out like that. And then they killed that boss, and then they went to the tree boss, and I was in for the tree, and I felt like I was an absolute god at doing the tree. I wonder if there's a video of our Il'gynoth kill, because I don't think there was a single Shadow Breeze playing the game who like did a better surrender to madness than I did on Il'gynoth, where I like perfectly timed it during prog without having like troll deaths to like mistiming it, where like I started it outside and brought the surrender to madness into the tree and just vaporized the fucking the heart with like a fully ramped surrender to madness, and I didn't die until like right as the boss was dying. It was like it was like a play of the fucking universe to like have timed it so well with us never having like really been there before. And that like kind of got me in more of a mood where I was like, they really didn't want me in the fucking dragons when this is the power, the raw power of Shadow. And then we got to Cenarius, and that fight sucked. Oh my god. Cenarius is probably like one of the worst bosses of all time. It was just so incredibly unfun and hard for like wrong reasons. One pull? No, I think it was like 15, 20, something like that. DSR missed. I don't know what that means. There's like a competing strategy for the markers that I don't know how to do. I gotta research it, I guess. But we beat Cenarius. I did like pretty okay on Surrender Madness on that, but I think something killed me. Like someone like terrorized me, and I think it caused me to die like 30 seconds before the boss did or something. And then we just murdered Xavius. Like, in the end, nothing really mattered because like all of the prep, all of the gearing you did for Xavius just didn't matter because you didn't need any good specs or anything to beat that boss. You just walked in and fucking killed it. It was so weird. It was like, we had like, when we were doing scenarios, we were like pretty behind on the scenarios prog compared to other guilds. And we were definitely like, oh my god, we're not gonna week one this boss before like anybody had killed Xavius. And then like we start seeing the Xavius kills like pile in, like, you know, like hours after guilds kill Cenarian, and we're like, what the fuck? Wait a second. So we finish up Cenarian, and like it like revitalized us. We were like, wait, we still have a shot if this boss is this easy. I don't know. It just, that's like the lore of like my mental decline in Emerald Nightmare, where it's just like, you put so much time into preparing your characters